is going to be all about cutting out your templates using a template plastic material. I like to use the heavy duty Dritz template plastic because it's thicker than a lot of the template plastics you'll get for quilting, for making your own templates, and it doesn't have any distracting grids or anything on it. Sometimes the grids can be really handy when you're cutting a lot of square things, but in this case I like the clear. So what you'll want to do is you'll need 2 of the sheets. This one's already been cut into, so it's smaller than what the sheets come. The sheets come about twice that large, and you'll need 2 sheets because we have some very large templates here. So in the pattern, these templates are already full size, and you will note on the instructions that you'll want to print this off to a US letter size, but do at full scale, 100%, no scale, and do not use the borderless printing, because that, even though you'd think that that would keep it at scale, it does skew it a little bit. So each template page has this square, and this should measure 1 inch square, and then you know that you printed these out to the correct size, because it's very important that these are printed out correctly. And what you'll be doing is you'll be taking your template plastic, and you might want to flip this out so it's flat, and using a Sharpie or some kind of a permanent marking tool, just go ahead and either freehand draw these. This curved piece will have to be freehand. These already include the seam allowance, so these are already full size. You don't have to add any seam allowance. If something is a straight edge piece, you can go ahead and either use the template plastic as your straight edge to help guide you, or you could also use a something with a straight edge like your rulers, and draw your lines that way. Anyway, you want to transfer this to the plastic. There are 4 templates. You've got 3 shapes, 1, 2, and this first one is 3. And this last one, this is a block trimming template. And what that does is, once your blocks are stitched together, and we will have a separate tutorial for this, once your blocks are stitched together, you're going to be using this one to square up your blocks. And I want you to transfer all the lines that you see onto this template here. The other one that you'll want to mark everything, this is template C, and I have the straight of green marked on this. You won't need to add your seam allowances on this because it's already in. You'll be sewing that. But this one, you do want to add your seam allowance because you'll be using that as a guide, and these curves. You may not be able to see this on the video really well, but these are marked lines here, and there's the curve of the shape, and we'll get into that in a separate video. But those 4 templates are what you're going to want to make with your template plastic. Now, and I'll get into why you see this tape on there in just a sec. So, and when you're cutting your template plastic, please use household scissors, non-fabric scissors, just utility type scissors, because if you were to use your fabric ones, you're going to dull your blade cutting into that plastic. And I don't even recommend using your rotary cutter to cut the plastic, because again, it'll dull your rotary cutter blade. So just use household ones, cut it out that way. Or if you want to use a ruler as a straight edge, and on the appropriate kind of mat, use a utility knife or an X-Acto knife and a guide to cut the straight lines. That's also an option too. So those are what you're going to need to start with. Make sure your stuff's printed out correctly before you start transferring it to your templates. Use that 1 inch guide to make sure you've done it right, and then transfer the shapes and the shape letters so you don't get them confused. And when you're referring to them in the with the pattern, you know which one we're talking about here when I say template B. So, the other tip I have for you with using these, in the instructions, it'll tell you what size strips to cut for the different shapes here. It will tell you how many to cut of each shape, but there's also a coloring page on this, and you may want to have your own color scheme for your quilt, and you will then determine how many of each shape you're going to need for that particular balloon color. In the instructions, you're going to be using fat eighths and fat quarters. This happens to be the full length of a fabric, 42 inches wide, usable. But if this was a fat quarter or even a fat eighth, I'd be using a 21-inch long strip. Many of the balloons, I think all the balloons, the only things that you're only going to be cutting singles of are the transition or transparency colors, and that uses this shape mostly, and a couple of the A shape will be transparencies, and those are only a single cut from one color. So, but for the most part, for a balloon, say like this balloon here, you're going to have to cut one square, two of these B shapes, and one A, all of the same fabric. And if you're like me, you like to be really efficient and cut one strip and then cut those shapes from there. Well, and here's a tip, that this B shape is actually larger than the rest of them. So this B shape, if you have that included in your color that you need, cut your strip to the largest size, which is the B shape, and that information is in your pattern. So I'm not going to give you that here, but so I've cut this strip to accommodate the B, and I'm going to want to cut for, I'm starting a third quilt here, and so for this one I'm going to want to cut one of these, one square, and two of the A shapes. So since I only need one, I'm going to, if I needed two, I would leave this doubled, but since I only need one, I'm going to open this up. Turn this around here. Again, I've started with before I even trimmed this strip, I made sure that my fabric was pressed as much as I could. Now, you've made your own template, right? And this can be a little slippery and a little tricky. So what I do, and I guess I should explain why there's tape on here. I'm starting my third quilt here. So this template's been used quite a bit already. It had the unfortunate accident of being underneath some fabric when I was cutting it. And so this got sliced, but since it's a clean slice, I just taped the two pieces together and double checked it against my template that in fact it was still true. And this had a little oopsie with the rotary cutter just kind of slicing into it. So rather than have that loose, I just put a piece of tape there to make sure that it was down. So it's not the prettiest template in the world, but it still works. So I have this washi tape, and what I like to do on a template that is made from template plastic is I like to roll the washi tape and stick it to the back of the template in 4 places is a really good a number of tape. I like to kind of try to cover all the different corners. Like I'll put one here, 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 and here. And what that will do is help hold the template in place while I'm cutting, so it doesn't want to slide. And then a lot of times on these templates, because they are curved, you're going to, once you isolate it from this larger strip, the template sticks to the fabric, and you can then rotate it without risking getting out of position. So of course this has the salvage edge on it. I'm not going to include that in my template. So I'm going to, because two of the sides of this B template are straight edges, I'm going to line them with the straight of grain of the fabric. And because this strip has been cut to this template size, I know from here to here it should match up. So now what I'm going to do is cut this shape out. I like to use a combination of the large standard size rotary cutter blade, and for any curves I like to use the small 28mm blade. Since this is a straight edge here, I'm going to use, take some of my things out of the way here, I'm going to use my straight edge. That way I have a much deeper guide, just like a rotary cutter would. And I'm going to do this, I'm going to cut this the way that it's not even recommended, because I'm right-handed. I'm actually going to hold this with my left hand and cut, you know, this isn't a recommended way to cut, but if you're careful, if you're slow, you're experienced, you can do this. Otherwise, I would totally recommend that this whole thing gets turned around. In fact, let's do it the right way. Okay, instead of doing it like this and crossing over, which is not only awkward looking, but could risk slipping or cutting yourself, I'm going to do it the proper way. And since my template is already attached, I don't even have to worry about reattaching this because it's sticky. I'm going to do this the right way since I'm right-handed. Okay, so using the straight edge there and lining it up against my plastic template. I'm going to use my larger rotary cutter for this. I'm just going to trim that off. Now I have a straight edge. And I can rotate this back around. Get that out of the way. Okay. Now, using this 28mm rotary cutter, and you're going to have to do this freehand. Just make sure your fingers, as you work along this, are well out of the way. A sharp blade is nice because a sharp blade, you're not going to have to put as much pressure onto things. And when you have pressure, you risk running off and, you know, hurting yourself. So just use the edge of the template as your guide. And the small rotary cutter is really nice because it just works around that curve really nicely, real easy. Cut, 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 cut. Done. All right. So there I have a B shape. Now, if I needed, you are going to have waste with this, with these curves. I mean, that's just, you know, maybe you can make a different project that uses a smaller part of this curve, but basically I have to trim this off here. It's just going to be wasted. Goes in the scrap bin. Using these, and I'm going to do it the wrong way because I'm not going to turn it this time. But switch back to my big blade. This is the wrong way. Not recommended to do your rotary cutter that way, but I've not had an accident yet. All right, now I have a straight edge again. And if I wanted to go ahead and make, I can't remember what number I said on this, 2 of these. I'm going to again use the straight edge of the template. Use your straight of grains here and align it to the straight of the strip. Take my small rotary cutter, go around this curve. And I would actually, what I should have done is doubled this up, and then I could have made this cut 2 in one swipe, but just for this purposes, I'll just make the 1. And then of course, if you had a square, you can cut a square from this. And if you ever plan on making any more See, this was a, if this were a fat quarter, I would have had 2 of these 21-inch length, and I would have used both of those. So that's how you do your cutting with these templates. And we, I'm sorry, let's just, I need to go over the C template. This one's just slightly different because it doesn't have a straight edge. But I do have a mark for you of the straight of grain. So you want to consider that when placing this. So I'm going to take this corner right here, and I have a point, match up the point, as much of the straight edge before that goes into the curve as possible. See how that matches? I don't know if you can see that right there. And this runs with the straight of grain. You can see this fold here, how these two parallel each other. So I know that this is very straight. And you would take your small 28mm rotary cutter and go ahead and follow the curve. One, and now because again the tape is on there, I can rotate that and get at a comfortable angle for cutting this other side. Now this piece here, C piece, is all, the raw edges of this are all bias. So you want to be careful handling this piece because there is, all this is very stretchy. These pieces here, at least 2 of the edges are on the straight of grain, so they'll hold their shape a little better. But this angle and this angle here, or edge and edge, are all on the bias as well. So all these pieces you'll want to handle with care. Press up and down rather than sliding them around, because sliding them around, especially if you're using steam, can distort your pieces. And you certainly don't want to distort them before you even get them sewn together. And like I said, in a future, a different video, I have how to square up your block once you've sewn it together using this template.